Hello artists, I am Mr. McCaffrey, and this class is called Introduction to Studio Art. Alright guys, let's go ahead and get started with our very first pen assignment. First of all, any pen that you can find on the ground, like these, are pens that are okay. If you're going to go to the store and you're going to buy some pens, some of the ones that I suggest are called Micron pens or Pilot pens. I have a whole bunch of different kinds of pens. They all have lots of different uses. But for your purposes, you only need to find a black pen. But again, the different types of pens are funner and just a little bit faster to get some things drawn in. So go ahead and find yourself some Prismacolor pens or some Micron pens or some Pilot pens. These are some brand names that I like, but any type of black pen really will work. Another thing that you could do is to take a pen, break it open, put it in a cup you're not going to use again, and then you can paint with that ink. And that's kind of nice because you can get some lighter tones by adding water and making that ink not quite as dark. Today we're going to concentrate on mark making and how using different kinds of marks we can create different types of shadows. So we're going to start by just drawing some vertical lines, some horizontal lines, some diagonal lines, and 3 shapes. And I want you to do that with every different kind of pen that you have. Now, of course, if you only have one type of pen, I don't think you really looked hard enough. But if that's the case, then I want you to draw several vertical, horizontal, and diagonal lines and several different shapes with that same pen so you get a little practice with it. Okay, next, you've guessed it, we're going to draw some value shifts. So of course this is something we've practiced in pencil a whole bunch of times. We're going to start with a rectangle. We're going to divide that rectangle up into 4 equal sections, and then we're going to go through and we're going to using different types of mark making techniques, we're going to draw a value shift. I'm going to make my third value shift a snake shape just to keep it interesting. Okay guys, for our first value shift, we're going to go ahead and use vertical lines. So what we're going to do is we're going to go through and we're going to fill each one of these individual sections. Again, there's 5 in total. We're going to fill them with vertical lines. As we are moving from the left to the right, those 5 sections need to get gradually darker. The way that we did that with the pencil was by shading it and then smearing it and then pressing it a little bit harder and smearing some more and shading some more until we had smooth value shifts. Obviously, we can't smear the pen, so what we need to do with the pen is we need to add lines. So the first box should have 5 to 10 lines, the second box should have 10 to 20 lines, the third box should have 40 to 60 lines, and the 5th box should have 90 to 100 lines, or around there, so that each one of the boxes gets darker. So the lines should be closer together, and there should be more of them each time you're drawing in a new box. Okay, vertical lines. Pay close attention to how it is light on the left and dark on the right. Okay, our next value shift is going to be made up of cross-hatching. So a hatch mark is anytime you draw a line in a direction. We did vertical hatch marks the last time. And this time we're going to do cross-hatching. So I'm going to draw lines that are diagonal, and then I'm going to cross them out by drawing diagonal lines in the opposite direction. And what you're noticing, hopefully, is that as I am moving to the right of my large rectangle, I am adding more and more lines. So the first box was crossed out by lines that are fairly far apart, and the second box is crossed out by lines that are pretty close together. Whoops, looks like I need to throw out that pen and start anew. This is why it's important to have a lot of different pens. And box number 3 gets even more diagonal lines and even darker because of it, until we get to the very end when it is so filled up with diagonal lines that cross each other out that it's hard to see them at all. One little trick that's helpful when shading is to blur your eyes and look at your drawing through blurred eyes. This way we can kind of tell if we're actually doing a pretty solid job of creating smooth changes to our value. If we look closely when the eyes are blurred, we can see that my first and second values are actually very similar, and so I need to add a few more lines in both of these areas. Finally, stippling. Stippling is the easiest but also the most time-consuming. So stippling is also known as pointillism. We can just call it dots for our purposes. And as the name suggests, you're going to put dots. In the beginning, you're going to put a very small amount of dots. And then you're going to add a few more dots and a few more until when you get to the very end, those dots are so dark that it's hard to tell that they're dots at all. Okay, the final step for our pen technician assignment, we're going to draw the 4 basic forms. We've practiced these many times now, and this is our first time doing with pen. We still want to make sure that we have our shadows, our highlights, and our cast shadows on the ground. Okay, let's start with the sphere. Now I'm going to shade the sphere in with these curved lines. I'm going to start by just drawing the outside shape, and then I'm going to draw in the shadow. Now again, the shadow is going to be darker closer to the object and get lighter as we move away. So I'm going to use these rounded lines because of course I'm drawing a rounded object. And I'm going to make sure that I start by drawing lines that are pretty far apart, and as we get closer to the object, those lines are going to get closer together. And we're going to do that exact same type of thing on the sphere itself. We want to use lines that match the object that we're drawing, and since the object that we are drawing is round, our lines should also be curved. This helps indicate to us what our object looks like in 3-dimensional space. Next, the cone. And so I'm going to use a different pen because I think it's important to try out lots of different pens. And for this cone, I'm going to use the cross-hatching technique. So again, I'm going to start out with some diagonal lines. I'm making them a little bit curved on the cone because the cone itself is rounded and curved, and therefore our lines should be curved as well. The shadow on the ground is flat because the ground is flat, and therefore I'm using straight lines for the shadow on the ground. Just like shading with pencil, we want to build up in layers, except for in this case, the layers are made up of specific different types of marks. Again, these are called cross-hatching, and I'm just putting the lines closer and closer together so that we have some dark areas, some middle gray tones, and some bright white highlights. Okay, moving on to the cylinder. Again, we're going to shade it in using lines that match the shape of the form itself. So I'm going to shade in the cylinder using curved lines. Okay, our final form is a cube. We're going to learn a lot more about cubes when we get to our linear perspective assignment, but for right now we're just going to focus on shading them in. I'm going to use a new pen for this one. This one is quite a bit bigger. It's almost like a marker. And of course, if you have a marker, feel free to use it. For this one, I'm going to go ahead and use the stipple technique, aka dots. I think dots look the best, but it is of course very time consuming. I also think it's the easiest because you don't have to concentrate on curving any lines to match any objects. You can simply add a whole bunch of dots, and then you do that blurring the eye technique, and you just continue to add dots until your cube looks like a nice cube.
Does my picture have to look like your picture?
No, definitely not. I want your art to be about you and to look like you.
Can my picture look like your picture?
Yes, of course. I'm an art teacher. You can absolutely copy what I've done.
What if my drawing isn't perfect? What if I'm terrible at art?
Well, no drawing is ever perfect, so we don't have to worry about that. What we do have to worry about is improving on our past performance.
Do I have to take a picture of this when I'm done?
Yes, every single time you complete an assignment in this class, you must photograph it and turn it in on Google Classroom. Every single time. Whoa, you did it! You finished! All you have to do now is take a picture of your work and turn it in on Google Classroom.